Hi, I'm Steve Price. Today I'm going to read two pieces, one a piece of fiction and one a piece of nonfiction that are about the mystery, magic, and metaphorically and even metaphysically about fishing, specifically fly fishing. So the first piece I'm going to read is a classic novella by a writer named Norman MacLean, and it's titled A River Runs Through It. And the book was made into a movie in 1992, directed by Robert Redford and starring a young Brad Pitt. So I'm going to read the opening section of that to begin. So this is A River Runs Through It by Norman MacLean. In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. We lived at the junction of great trout rivers in western Montana, and our father was a Presbyterian minister and a fly fisherman who tied his own flies and taught others. He told us about Christ's disciples being fishermen, and we were left to assume, as my brother and I did, that all first-class fishermen on the Sea of Galilee were fly fishermen, and that John the favorite was a dry fly fisherman. It is true that one day a week was given over wholly to religion. On Sunday mornings, my brother, Paul, and I went to Sunday school and then to morning services to hear our father preach, and in the evenings to Christian Endeavor, and afterwards to evening services to hear our father preach again. In between, on Sunday afternoons, we had to study the Westminster Shorter Catechism for an hour and then recite before we could walk the hills with him while he unwound between services. But he never asked us more than the first question in the catechism: what is the chief end of man? And we answered together, so one of us could carry on if the other forgot. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. This always seemed to satisfy him, as indeed such a beautiful answer should have. And besides, he was anxious to be on the hills where he could restore his soul and be filled again to overflowing for the evening sermon. His chief way of recharging himself was to recite to us from the sermon that was coming, enriched here and there with selections from the most successful passages of his morning sermon. Even so, in a typical week of our childhood, Paul and I probably received as many hours of instruction in fly fishing as we did in all other spiritual matters. After my brother and I became good fishermen, we realized that our father was not a great fly caster, but he was accurate and stylish and wore a glove on his casting hand. As he buttoned his glove in preparation to giving us a lesson, he would say, "It is an art that is performed on a 4-count rhythm between 10 and 2 o'clock." As a Scot and a Presbyterian, my father believed that man by nature was a mess and had fallen from an original state of grace. Somehow I early developed the notion that he had done this by falling from a tree. As for my father, I never knew whether he believed God was a mathematician, but he certainly believed God could count, and that only by picking up God's rhythms were we able to regain power and beauty. Unlike many Presbyterians, he often used the word beautiful. After he buttoned his glove, he would hold his rod straight out in front of him, where it trembled with the beating of his heart. Although it was 8.5 feet long, it weighed only 4.5 ounces. It was made of split bamboo cane from the far-off Bay of Tonkin. It was wrapped with red and blue silk thread, and the wrappings were carefully spaced to make the delicate rod powerful, but not so stiff that it would not tremble. Always it was to be called a rod. If someone called it a pole, my father looked at him as a sergeant in the U.S. Marines would look at a recruit who just called a rifle a gun. My brother and I would have preferred to start learning how to fish by going out and catching a few, omitting entirely anything difficult or technical in the way of preparation that would take away from the fun. But it wasn't by way of fun that we were introduced to our father's art. If our father had his say, nobody who did not know how to fish would be allowed to disgrace a fish by catching him. So you too will have to approach the art Marine and Presbyterian style, And if you have never picked up a fly rod before, you will soon find it factually and theologically true that man by nature is a damn mess. The 4.5-ounce thing in silk wrappings that trembles with the underskin motions of the flesh becomes a stick without brains, refusing anything simple that is wanted of it. And that all that a rod has to do is lift the line, the leader, and the fly off the water, give them a good toss over the head, and then shoot them forward so they will land in the water. So what's so remarkable about picking up a rod with a line on it and tossing the line across the river? Well, until man is redeemed, he will always take a fly rod too far back, just as natural man always overswings with an axe or a golf club and loses all his power somewhere in the air. Only with the rod it's worse, because the fly often comes so far back, it gets caught behind in a bush or a rock. Then, since it is natural for man to try to attain power without recovering grace, he whips the line back and forth, making it whistle each way, and sometimes even snapping off the fly from the leader. But the power that was going to transport the little fly across the river somehow gets diverted into building a bird's nest of line, leader, and fly that falls out of the air into the water about 10 feet in front of the fisherman. If, though, he pictures the round trip of the line, transparent leader, and fly from the time they leave the water until they return, they're easier to cast. My father was very certain about certain things pertaining to the universe. To him, all good things, trout as well as eternal salvation, come by grace. And grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. So my brother and I learned to cast Presbyterian style on a metronome. It was my mother's metronome, which my father had taken from the top of the piano in town. She would occasionally peer down to the dock from the front porch of the cabin, wondering nervously whether her metronome would float if it had to. When she became so overwrought that she thumped down the dock to reclaim it, my father would start clapping out the 4-count rhythm with his cupped hands. Fortunately, he introduced us to literature on this subject. He tried always to say something stylish as he buttoned his glove on his casting hand. Isaac Walton, he told us when my brother was 13 or 14, is not a respectable writer. He was an Episcopalian and a bait fisherman. Although Paul was 3 years younger than I was, he was already far ahead of me in anything related to fishing, and it was he who first found a copy of The Complete Angler, complete spelled C-O-M-P-L-E-A-T, and reported back to me, "Bastard doesn't even know how to spell complete." When you are in your teens, maybe throughout your life, being 3 years older than your brother often makes you feel he is a boy. However, I knew already that he was going to be a master with a rod. He had those extra things besides fine training: genius, luck, and plenty of self-confidence. Even at this age, he liked to bet on himself against anybody who would fish with him, including me, his older brother. It was sometimes funny, and sometimes not so funny, to see a boy always wanting to bet on himself, and almost always sure to win. Although I was 3 years older, I did not yet feel old enough to bet. Betting, I assumed, was for men who wore straw hats on the backs of their heads. So I was confused and embarrassed the first couple of times he asked me if I didn't want a small bet on the side just to make things interesting. The third time he asked me must have made me angry, because he never again spoke to me about money. Not even about borrowing a few dollars when he was having real money problems. We had to be very careful in dealing with each other. I often thought of him as a boy, but I could never treat him that way. He was never my kid brother. He was a master of an art. He did not want any big brother advice or money or help, and in the end, I could not help him. So these are the final words of the novella. This is how it ends. Now I am too old to be much of a fisherman, and now, of course, I usually fish the big waters alone, although some friends think that I should not. Like many fly fishermen in western Montana, where the summer days are almost Arctic in length, I often do not start fishing until the cool of the evening. Then in the Arctic half-light of the canyon, all existence fades to a being with my soul and memories and the sounds of the big Blackfoot River and a 4-count rhythm and the hope that a fish will rise. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. So the second piece I'm going to read is something that I wrote. It's published in the Maine Sunday Telegram as a Maine observer. And the headline is, Anglers See Fishing as a Metaphor for Life. And the subhead reads, in fact, it may hold the very meaning of life because all the inevitable failures teach them persistence and patience. Anyone who takes up fishing never looks at water the same way again. You're always reading it, looking for the places that might hold a fish. It's a strange obsession, characterized by the last line of A River Runs Through It, a tragicomic novella that at its heart is a paean to fly fishing. It is, I am haunted by waters. All anglers are haunted by waters. The term angler is also a bit strange. Apparently, it has been used since the 16th century and is based on the verb to angle, which has meant to fish since the late 15th century. The term is certainly descriptive in one sense, as from one angle, your casting line gets tangled up in the trees. From another angle, your fly gets hung up on the bottom. And from yet another angle, you've hooked your earlobe. I'm a novice fly fisherman trying to learn all the angles. What I lack in experience, skill, and knowledge, I make up in mulish perseverance. I don't like to get skunked not catching fish. I don't give up easily. That said, I've had many a fishless day on the water. All anglers know that fishing is a metaphor for life. In fact, fishing may hold the very meaning of life. All this failure teaches you persistence and patience. Just untangling those god-awful fishing line knots can translate to dealing more calmly with life's more important, knottier problems. Fishing definitely teaches you humility. My most humbling fishing experience came on the Pleasant River. I had been fishing all morning with absolutely no luck. As I returned to my car, the Maine Island Fisheries and Wildlife truck pulled up. To my astonishment and delight, they were there to stock the river with 100 nice-sized brown trout. My eyes opened wide. My heart rate quickened. I was sure this was going to result in a record catch. The phrase shooting fish in a barrel leaped to mind. I could actually see the trout swimming madly in a large pool right in front of me, rising frequently to gulp mayflies that landed weightless on the water. So excited that my hand trembled, I cast, and I cast, and I cast. But no fly, nymph, or streamer could get the attention of these mean-spirited fish. I was in fishing hell. Can fish laugh, I wondered. If so, they were laughing their little anal cavities off at me. Fortunately, no one else was there to witness my futility and my embarrassment. Because I am retired, I can fish on weekdays. I often have the luxury of being the only angler on my stretch of water. It grants me a wonderful solitude that I cherish. Even on the days I catch no fish, I have the sound of rushing water all around me, the picture postcard scenery of winding river or brook, the company of rising great blue herons, soaring hawks, and swimming beavers and otters. And every once in a while, I catch a fish or two, and life is perfect. Thank you for listening.